The ancient witness this morning is from Exodus 20, verses 1 through 3 and verses 8 through 11. Then God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it.
Earlier this week, I sent out my weekly message in the email, and I mentioned that there are a lot of reasons right now why we should be concerned these days. All you have to do is listen to the news. Our economy and inflation are making it more difficult, especially, we should remember, especially for those who are poor and who are working and can barely make ends meet, that this is a major problem in our nation today. And also, our democracy seems to be hanging by a thread. And many of the rights that we have taken for granted now seem to be in peril. Rights for LGBTQ people, rights for women, reproductive rights, and on and on. And also, there's this continued evidence this summer, isn't there, of this unfolding catastrophe of global warming right now. And so this morning, I want to consider this. How do we find the strength as spiritual activists to persevere and not give up? And I shared this poem. I want to share it with you today. It's a great poem by Wendell Berry that speaks to me on this. He said, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound and fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the green heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. And for a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I'm free. And so this morning, let's take a look at the importance of resting in the grace of the world, also known in our tradition as Sabbath. In the book of Genesis, the ancient myth says that God set aside a certain amount of time as rest, as holy and sacred. The scripture says that even God rested. God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it because God rested from all the work that God had done during creation. And here we have a glimpse, I think, of what it means to be whole persons. And God models this Sabbath wholeness, and it's a gift for our own well-being. In Deuteronomy, Sabbath as a day of rest from labor is also a reminder of God delivering the people from oppression of their taskmasters in Egypt. And so Sabbath is a sign of God's desire that all people are not mere cogs in a machine. It is a sign of God's liberation of people from a life of mere drudgery and toil. It is written, remember that you are a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. And so part of Sabbath, I want us to understand this, is about justice. It's about treating all people with dignity and not exploiting them for their work. The notion of Sabbath is more than just this sense of personal wholeness. It involves social wholeness. It involves providing rest for families and strangers and workers and the animals and the land. Hallow the Sabbath means to hallow one another, to hallow the cattle, to hallow the earth and take care of the earth. It's a statement about human relationships. It's not just individual completeness, it's about completeness of communities. It's about the completeness of society. In a world that is organized and centered around tasks and results, Sabbath emphasizes the value of relationship with children, with each other, and with life itself. Sabbath is the experience of being able to trace our deep connections and make them bolder. And so time stands still. It's suspended. And we feel our connections with humanity. We feel our oneness. We feel our connections with creation in our awareness of our unity as sisters and brothers. After the Industrial Revolution, our world changed, and labor eventually saw the need to set some limits. For example, the 40-hour work week was established with the help of unions in this nation. Better working conditions, safety laws, pensions for retirement, the abolition of child labor, all followed as a social movement, the labor movement in this nation, which I say to you is part of the notion of Sabbath. These are just some of the ways that even society has recognized the need for rest, the need for time for personal wholeness, the need for family wholeness. Even society recognizes this need. Just look at all the talk about stress management and stress seminars. Human beings know that we don't live by bread alone. And we need time set aside to rest and to integrate and to center ourselves, and that all people deserve this. Not just the select few. But for the last few decades, the American workers have been losing ground in this area. Many have felt the pressure of stagnant wages, cuts in benefits, and demands to work longer and harder. Parents have less and less time to spend with their families, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs. So a part of us knows the truth of Sabbath, yet we resist. As individuals, we often stoke our own egos and strive for achievements at the expense of Sabbath. As a society, we deny Sabbath to others by denying living wages to jobs and making lives difficult, harsh, and without much rest. In the Gospel of Mark, we read that Jesus said, look, he said, Sabbath was created for you, for your own well-being. Trust me, he said. It's not there for you either to manipulate or ignore. But it's difficult to practice Sabbath in our world today, especially in our late-stage capitalistic society. Much of this we impose on ourselves. Many of us feel terrible guilt when we take rests for ourselves. We feel like we're slackers. Wayne Mueller described it well. He says, it becomes a standard greeting everywhere. I'm so busy. We say this to one another with no small degree of pride, as if our exhaustion were a trophy. Our ability to withstand stress was some kind of mark of our character. The busier we are, said Mueller, the more important we seem to ourselves and we imagine to others. To be unavailable to our friends and family, to be unable to find time for the sunset, to whiz through our obligations without time for a single mindful breath. This has become the model of the successful life. In returning and in rest, you shall be saved, said the prophet. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. Writer Frederick Buechner said that we return to our deep strength and to our confidence that lies beneath all of our misgiving. The quiet there, the rest, is beyond the reach of the world to disturb. It is how being saved sounds. So we talk a lot about being saved. This is how being saved sounds. And so Jesus said this. He said, "Come to me, all of you who are weighed down, who are heavily burdened." And what does he say? "I will give you rest." This is what this is what the Spirit of Sabbath is about. And we see Jesus, the model for human wholeness, was always withdrawing and stopping and reflecting. He would take these breaks with his disciples and he would say, "Come away by yourselves to a lonely place," he said, "and rest a while." And even though Jesus practiced Sabbath in his own living, there were many instances where he was accused of just the opposite, of disregarding the observance of Sabbath by those who were more interested in the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. Many accused Jesus of undermining the tradition, but Jesus was simply reinterpreting the tradition as we are all called to reinterpret the tradition ourselves. He clearly thought that he was following the Spirit. This is part of what I'm talking about today. That what does Sabbath mean for us today? What's the Spirit of Sabbath all about? John Calvin, the father of the Reformation, said that on the Sabbath we cease our work so God can do God's work in us. And so for Jesus, remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy meant bringing life into the Sabbath day. And so he did acts like healing and compassion and feeding the hungry on those days too. So he brought life into the Sabbath day, but it also meant injecting Sabbath into the rest of our lives. And so he took time to rest and to pray and to reflect on more than just on the seventh day. And so he saw Sabbath as something that we do as a way of living. Simply making space for supper together each day can be a way of practicing Sabbath. The Spirit of Sabbath is about living a balanced life. You know, as people of faith, so much of our journey is this outward journey. You know, we go to school, we educate ourselves, we work hard, and we play hard. We help others. We struggle for justice, and all of these things are good things, don't get me wrong. But our tradition says that we cannot neglect the inward journey. We're called to stop doing all things that we do to fill the void in our lives, and to just rest in the stillness and the silence, which is the language of God. Rabbi Abraham Heschel said that in Sabbath we try to become attuned to the holiness of time. And Heschel was suggesting that the meaning of the verb Shabbat from Sabbath is to be complete. So the command to rest or to cease or to desist from work and to let go, contrary to our modern culture, asserts that human beings become complete not by doing anything, but by not doing, by rest. Sabbath holds these two ideas of rest and completion together. I also need to add that Sabbath rest is not just mere relaxation, but it's also about resting in the divine. It's about trusting in a reality that embraces us when we're resting. Biblical scholar Eugene Peterson put it this way. He says, that keeping Sabbath is really about two things: playing and praying. We need both, he says. But it's difficult to integrate them. And he said, in America, we have conspicuous examples of widespread observance of half Sabbaths. Prayerful Sabbaths without any play, and playful Sabbaths without any prayer. And so what I'm saying is that it is to be still with a clear intention. It is to be quiet and to listen and be attentive. It is to experience and enjoy life without guilt, to celebrate what is beautiful, what is good, with gratitude and wonder, without thinking that you should be doing something. After all, it's often pointed out that we're human beings. We're not human doings. It's good to stop and to focus on our truest essence once in a while. And so from a spiritual perspective, it's important to stop and to be still, to drop our goals, to drop our agenda, to open ourselves and to rest, simply rest in the holy mystery. Sabbath invites us to take joy not in what we will be or what we might be, but to take joy in what already is right now. It's to savor the simplest pleasures of life and of God's love and acceptance. I like to think of it as practicing living in the sufficiency of grace. We often say that God's grace is sufficient for us, but how often do we actually live our lives like that? Sabbath time is to say we don't need to achieve anything. We don't really need to produce results. We don't need to have approval or respect even. There's only one thing that we absolutely, essentially need, and we already have it. That is the sacred presence. That's what the spiritual life is all about. The spirit of Sabbath is to pause and see that life itself is miraculous and beautiful, like the Creator. We find it good. It is to see that God is present at the heart of each moment and that nothing is more important than this. It's a way of living that allows God to work in us. It's when we slow down and we take time to feel the depth of life and to sense the presence of the holy. And so this morning I want to end with another poem. This is a new favorite poet of mine. Her name is Clellan Harkin. It's called The Flower. And she said this. She said, the flower never had a to-do list. Not one day of her life. She just pointed her whole self toward light. The rest took care of itself. And so, friends, let us take the time to do nothing other than point ourselves to the light. Amen.